Silent Hunters of the Deep, World War II submarines. The US Navy had submarines by the First World War, but those during World War II were not only faster and more lethal, but also generally more effective and beneficial to the outcome of the war. What subs were the Silent Hunters of the Deep during those dark times, and what made them so special? Stay with us in this video to find out. The US Navy began building warfare submarines back as far as the 1900s. However, by the time World War II began in 1939, all of those subs had become outdated. They were too slow, had too little weaponry, and had less technology than those developed by the German and Japanese navies. So the US Navy literally had to launch construction and commission 3 different classes of submarines specifically for the Second World War. The only submarines which had been in service just months before the war began were the Tambor class. This class was made up of 12 vessels, 6 of which were put under the GAR subclass commissioned a couple of years after the original Tambors. They were the Navy's first fully successful fleet submarine after the AA-1 class in 1918. It took a lot of political maneuvering to get the designs for these subs approved, seeing as there was no immediate need for them at the time. But we bet the Navy and the powers that be were glad they launched the Tambor class when they did. Although these submarines were somewhat similar to the Sargo class, which preceded them, they were the first US submarines to have 6 bow torpedo tubes. Tambor-class subs also had improved streamlining to make them faster, and the negative tank design to make the submarine go underwater more quickly. For better combat efficiency, the vessels in this class had improved sonar operators, new periscope designs to make detection by enemies harder, and the torpedo data computer for better communication between crew members. During initial construction, the Tambors only had 3-inch 50 caliber gun decks. However, when the Second World War broke out, the armament was improved to 5-inch 51 caliber guns. This upgrade required strengthening of the supporting deck, so not every boat in the class got the new guns immediately. Others had to make do with 4-inch 50 caliber guns. Very much unlike World War I submarines, the Tambor class had provisions to substitute mines for torpedoes. That's right, each torpedo could be replaced with about 2 Mk-10 or Mk-12 mines. It's important to note, though, that the vessels were never permitted to carry the maximum capacity of 48 mines, even when on mine-laying missions, both during and after the war. These subs were also built to have a top speed of 21 knots, ranging of 11,000 nautical miles, and had a full diesel-electric propulsion plant engine, which proved to be one of the best submarine engines ever. For all the strengths of these submarines, they all had one major weakness. The 4 engines of the boat were fit in just one compartment. This made the submarines easy to be destroyed by enemy watercrafts, because just one torpedo blast on that compartment would render the sub useless. This weakness was heavily exploited during the war, although the Tambors had pretty successful outings at sea. 6 of them were deployed to Hawaiian waters, or the Central Pacific, while the others served in the United States. Of the 12 Tambor-class submarines, namely Tambor, Tautog, Thresher, Triton, Trout, Tuna, Gar, Grampus, Grayback, Grayling, Grenadier, and Gudgeon, 7 were sunk during the war, giving this class the highest percentage lost of any US submarine class. Despite this poor collective record, Submarine Tautog was able to stand out, as it is the US submarine with the highest number of enemy ships sunk during World War II, having sunk a total of 26 ships. Pretty impressive, right? Disappointingly, the successors of the Tambor-class submarines, the Mackerel class, only ever served as training and experimental vessels during the war. The next submarines that actually served in World War II were the GATT class. Known to be the first mass-produced US submarine class of World War II, these boats were commissioned starting from November 1941, and by April 1944, 76 others had been commissioned, 20 of which ended up lost in the war. Despite the GATTs being built at 4 different locations, all of them, with the exception of USS Dorado, fought in the Pacific Theater of Operations. Some were later reassigned to Submarine Squadron 50, where they patrolled the Bay of Biscay in Rosneth, Scotland, and assisted Operation Torch landings in North Africa until 1942. Eventually, all the GATTs were called back and deployed to the front line of the battle against the Japanese Navy from mid to late 1942. And we have to say, these classes of submarines were as effective in the war as any other class of watercraft. Some major GATT-class achievements in World War II include Albacore sinking the newest Japanese aircraft carrier Taiho, Kavala sinking the Japanese aircraft carrier Shokaku, Cobia sinking the ship carrying Japanese tank reinforcements, and USS Finback being used to recover downed pilot LTJG and future President of the United States, George H.W. Bush, after his torpedo bomber was damaged. And there's more. Gatto-class USS Flasher was the second highest scoring U.S. vessel of the war. Silverside sunk 23 ships, which was the third most of any Allied World War II submarine, behind only the USS Tang and the USS Tautog. And the USS Rasher sank the third or second most tonnage during the war on her 8 patrols in the Pacific. It's fair to say the Gatto class was very successful overall, thanks to their design. These vessels had a lot of similar features to the Tambor and Gar class ships, but were built to have better diving depth and did not have Tambor's weakness of one-compartment engines. Instead, an extra 5 feet in length was added to allow addition of a watertight bulkhead for 2 engine rooms, with 2 diesel generators in each room. Inevitably, the significantly massive size of these boats made them slower divers than their German and British counterparts. But what they lacked in speed, the Gattos made up for in weaponry and range, as they had enough fuel bunkerage to provide the range necessary for 75-day patrols from Hawaii to Japan and back. They also had the negative tank design for faster submerging, and were equipped with so much crew comfort it was considered luxury during the war. Showers, air conditioning, refrigerated storage for food, abundant freshwater distilling units, clothes washers, and bunk beds were all fitted into the submarines from the start of the war. The air conditioning particularly played a major role in the health and efficiency of the crew, as it was designed to counter the harsh temperature of any region the subs were deployed to. During the early years of World War II, the Gatto class operated primarily with steam-powered Mark 14 torpedoes. Electric Mark 18 torpedoes were added later on, due to the many flaws of the Mark 14s. However, the Navy only created the Mark 18s as a hastily copied version of captured German G7s, so they also ended up having faults which had to be modified and corrected multiple times. The main armament made use of were the 4-inch 50 caliber Mk9 guns removed from old S-class submarines. These guns were later replaced by 5-inch 25 caliber Mk17 guns, although some of the Gatto-class submarines got to keep both. They also had anti-aircraft guns, like the single 40mm Bofors and twin 20mm Oerlikon mounts, as well as provisions to substitute mines in place of torpedoes like their predecessors. All through the war, the Gatto-class submarines underwent a lot of modifications to their appearance, and by the end of World War II, these boats looked a lot like modern nuclear submarines with their fully shrouded fairwaters. Just as these modifications were being made, the US Navy launched the Baleo-class vessels. A total of 120 boats in this class were commissioned, making them the largest class of submarines in the United States Navy. Although they were not as collectively successful as the Gatto-class subs, 2 members of the Baleo class are considered among the most iconic World War II warcrafts. The first of which is the USS Tang, which ranks second on the list of number of ships sunk in the war with 33, and first on the list of tonnage with 116,454. She also had the most successful war patrol of any US submarine in history, with 10 ships for 39,100 tons in her third patrol. Tang was later sunk and captured in Taiwan due to a circular run of her own torpedo, but was later released following the Japanese surrender at the end of the war, with her skipper Richard O'Kane receiving the Medal of Honor. The other famous Baleo class is the Archerfish, which sank Shinano, the largest ship ever sunk by a submarine, earning her commander Enright the Navy Cross. Despite entering service relatively late in mid-1943, the Baleos played a big role as the submarine force nearly destroyed all of the Japanese merchant fleet and caused significant damage to the Imperial Japanese Navy. While only 9 of this class submarines were lost in World War II, a couple ended up lost after the war, and a member of this class, USS Lancetfish, holds the infamous record for being the shortest commissioned ship of any USN submarine after being sunk by a flood just 42 days into service. When compared to the Gatto class, the only major improvements the Baleo class had was the use of thicker, higher yield strength steel in pressure hull skins and frames. This made them have better test depth, as deep as 499 feet, although Tang once went as far as 612 feet while evading a destroyer. Other than that, the Baleos had similar engine designs to their predecessors, similar anti-aircraft and mine armaments, and they also had their deck guns modified from 4-inch 50 caliber Mk9 guns to 5-inch 25 caliber Mk17 guns. Only USS Spadefish was commissioned in 1944 with the purpose-built 5-inch 25 submarine mount. These boats also had better fairwater designs and refined reductions to the conning tower, periscope shears, and the sail. The last submarines which served in World War II were the Tench-class submarines. Seeing as they were built in 1944 and 1951, these boats were an improvement over all their predecessors in nearly every aspect. Their only flaw is that they began coming into service just about a year before the war ended. This actually became an issue as the US Navy had no need for these types of submarines by the end of the war. Eventually, most of the 29 were converted to reassemble the German Type 21 U-boat, which had a larger battery capacity, better streamlining for increased underwater speed, and a snorkel. And as you'd expect, making so many modifications to an entire class of newly built ships ended up costing the Navy a lot more revenue than deemed necessary by many. Tench-class submarines had the same diesel-electric propulsion layout as the last few Vallejo-class, with 4 two-stroke diesel engines supplying 2 low-speed double-armature direct-drive electric motors to drive 2 shafts. However, the direct-drive electric motors were much quieter than that of the previous classes. The drivetrain was more reliable, and the main ballast tanks were repositioned to eliminate risk of rupture and flooding. This tank rearrangement also made it possible for the submarines to carry 4 additional torpedoes in the forward torpedo room, making their torpedo armament a total of 28. Like her predecessors, the Tenches were armed with at least one 5-inch 25 caliber gun, additional single 40mm Bofors, and twin 20mm Oerlikon mounts for anti-aircraft weaponry. They also had the same mine armament as previous Tambor, Gar, Gatto, and Vallejo classes. Initially, 80 Tench-class submarines were ordered to be built, but by 1944, it was clear that they weren't needed to defeat the Japanese Navy, so production was called off, leaving only 29 finished Tench-class. That's all for this video on the US Navy submarines for the Second World War. Check out our channel for similar exciting videos like this.